Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. We have the immense privilege of having Stefanie Overstreet, registered nurse, nutritional therapy practitioner, and postpartum support practitioner using her signature method, the PEACE method, with all of her postpartum clients. Welcome, Stefanie. I'm so glad you're on with us today.
Thank you for having me back. I always enjoy having these chats with you.
Oh, well, you're welcome anytime. I feel like, we always dialogue regularly and we're like, that needs to be an episode. So it
Mhm.
always, just our conversations usually end up becoming, helping other people too. So I just love that you're so willing to share your expertise and your experience. And for those of you that are listening, we're really tackling this month the topic of shame and understanding the different voices that shame has and where it tries to come into our life and influence our perspectives, or really just kind of put a damper on the process that we're in, and why it is so important to identify those patterns of shame in ourselves. And so this episode, we're going to be specifically talking about shame as it relates to postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and other postpartum issues that occur during that season of life. So, Stefanie, I would love for you to just share a little bit about your story and your journey with that, and then we'll kind of dialogue from there.
Yeah. So I was a registered nurse for a number of years before I became a mom, and I had a background in pediatrics and postpartum nursing in the hospital. So when it was my turn to become a mom, I had a sense of confidence and maybe even a little bit of pride of like, oh, I've got this handled. I've taken care of many babies and new moms, and it should be fine. I kind of went into it like a lot of first time moms do, where we kind of think like, yeah, I've heard of different struggles, but that won't be me.
Okay.
And so when I had my daughter, I didn't realize it, but I think while I was pregnant, I had some um, bits of perinatal depression, which is something that is often not talked about. But sometimes women can have symptoms of depression during pregnancy, just not feeling like yourself, low mood, things like that. And so that is actually a strong risk factor for postpartum mood issues. And I had no idea about that at the time. I didn't even know that that's what I was struggling with. I just kind of thought it was just me, you know?
Right.
And so then when I shifted into postpartum, then I found myself kind of in hot water with a number of different symptoms going on, ranging from mood swings and rage and anger and fear and feeling out of control and um, inability to sleep and uh, eventually I think low mood and depression because things were just so all over the place with the
Right.
anxiety and just I felt like I completely lost myself. And before long it was like I would look in the mirror and just be like, I don't know who that is. Like it was so far from what I envisioned and expected.
Right.
And I had this narrative. I remember thinking this from the day that my oldest was born. I should know how to do this. There was
Mm,
kind of this, because I'm a nurse and because of my background, I should know. Like, I taught women in the hospital how to breastfeed. So I felt shame about the fact that I needed my midwife to help me learn how to breastfeed, because it was like, well, I should know how to,
mhm.
or just like, the challenges of taking care of a newborn. No one can really prepare you for what that's like. And especially doing it sleep deprived and with postpartum hormones shifting.
Right.
And so I just felt like a fish out of water, but I had this narrative again of I should know how to do this. And
Mhm.
so I think that was where shame first started. And then obviously, as I'm having all of these different symptoms and just not doing well, I started feeling like I'm just not transitioning to motherhood well. Like I'm just
Mm,
not handling this well. And I remember there were a mix of different things. Like I had one or two women kind of say, like, well, maybe you have postpartum going on. And I remember, depending on the day, I may have felt receptive to that. And then
right.
other times, I remember my husband saying, I talked to so and so's husband and she had postpartum depression. And he says that it's a chemical imbalance. And I remember yelling at my husband, I do not have a chemical imbalance,
Hmm.
because there was just so much shame about
Totally.
something being wrong with me. And yet that is the predominant feeling that I had, was this feeling of like, something is wrong with me. I can't do this. And really, as time went on, it was more messages of, I'm failing at this. I'm bad at this. I'm just not a good mom. I just can't
Mhm.
do this. Everybody else can do it but me. It was interesting how I think at the time I really was not experienced in learning how to examine the thoughts that I was
Right.
entertaining. So a lot of these thoughts were just crossing my mind, coming every which way. And I just kind of accepted them all as true. And I think it's interesting when we think about confirmation bias, our brain is looking for things in the natural, for evidence to support the beliefs that we have.
Right.
So I do think that there was this unfortunate circumstance where there were challenges to begin with. And then this shame narrative came in. And
Yep.
then I found plenty of evidence in my life to support that shame narrative. And I
Mhm.
really, I think, walked in partnership with it. And, um, that only kind of compounded it. And at the time, no one was talking about it. And I would have good days where I would think like, "Oh, I can handle this. Maybe I'm fine." And then I would have really off days, like horrible days, and I would be
Mhm.
like, "No, something is wrong with me." So it was
Right.
very confusing. Honestly, it was very confusing. And I just didn't really know what was typical or normal. And
Mhm.
so I think it took me a while to kind of realize that I needed some support, but I really struggled for the first several months with even really I really just couldn't even verbalize what was going on, because I think I was
Right.
so locked up in shame and just not wanting other people to think that I wasn't a good mom, because that's
Right.
what we want most, is to be a good mom and to enjoy our baby. So I was really sad that those two things didn't feel like they were happening, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and I think it compounds the shame because there's also disappointment under there of like,
Mhm.
this was supposed to be enjoyable and it's not. Like,
Mhm.
it's really hard. And
Mhm.
I'm struggling. And I don't know how to say that I'm struggling because I don't really even know how to articulate like what's happening in, is it my mind? Is it my body? Am I just sleep deprived? Like, there's so many different elements to that.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, there were a couple like themes that I picked up on within that. So which, a lot of them are the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, right? So
Mhm.
I shouldn't struggle. This
Mhm.
shouldn't be hard. I should have this all together. I should know better.
Mhm.
But knowing better doesn't always equate to like there's a difference between what we know cognitively and then being able to actually function, like
Mhm.
having the capacity to function in that.
Mhm.
And so how did like when in that timeline would you say that you kind of became aware that this is like too much and I need to now do something to get out of it? Like you're kind of waking up to the fact that this probably isn't normal and I probably need to get some help.
Yeah, I would say it was about 4 months postpartum, I really just kind of tried to write it out and, um, focused on the good days. But then I think it was about 3 or 4 months postpartum. I was volunteering at a faith based pregnancy center at the time as a registered nurse. And so I had attended a training where we were taught the Edinburgh um, screening tool for postpartum depression and anxiety so that we could refer moms out to a county program. And I think I had attended that training at the end of my pregnancy. So I had some like vague knowledge that there was a resource. So I ended up just going into the pregnancy center and talked to um, the volunteer coordinator who was overseeing me as a volunteer. And I just told her, like, I am really struggling. I am not doing well. I'm not coping well. I think I need help. And so she helped me get referred into that program. So I think she was someone that I could really open up to because I knew her, had a relationship with her, but also the context for which I knew her. We were meeting with women who were having unplanned pregnancies and,
Right.
talking to them about their options and supporting them when they chose to keep their pregnancy. And so she was very used to working with women in taboo, shameful, if you
Right.
will, circumstances. So I did feel comfortable talking to her about it, even though it was very painful to admit where I was at. But I think all the time about how fortunate I was that I knew about that resource, that I had
Hmm.
access to her, because I just think about the average woman who was in my shoes and just would have no idea where to even start.
Right.
That was really what ended up leading me into what I'm doing now and working with postpartum women and supporting them was really because of the shame that I felt and how hard it was to speak up and even
Mhm.
just admit to myself what was really going on. It
Yep.
was like there needs to be more. This needs to be talked about more.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it touches on a couple things. One is that shame becomes a barrier to actually receiving the help that's available to us, like
Mhm,
100% of the time, right?
mhm, mhm.
Two, the question it like kind of taps on in my heart or that makes me wonder, and I would be asking myself the same question is, where does that belief come from that it's wrong to struggle? Like,
Exactly.
and you actually asked me this question like 2 days ago. So, like, hey, where did that come from? Because I'm hearing like a pattern, in the conversation, and I think it's really important to talk about that. Like where, and I'm still chewing on it. I don't have an answer for myself yet, but I'm wondering if now that you have having some perspective on that season,
Mhm,
where did that, because it is like a performance-based
mhm,
kind of fear-based thought, right? Of,
mhm,
where does that come from of it's not okay for me to not be okay, or it's not okay for me to struggle? Like,
mhm.
do you have it? Are you able to identify for you what that was?
Yeah, definitely. So I was going to add to the fact I didn't say this earlier, but another thing that was a strong message. One was it's not okay for me to struggle. I should know better. And the other was kind of this self-blame message of there's
Mm,
something wrong with me. I'm doing something wrong.
yes.
I'm the reason that all of this is going poorly. It's almost like I couldn't see outside of myself and just look at the situation and go, you've just had a number of really hard things happen, and anybody in your shoes would be struggling. And
Right.
you know what I'm saying? So I think that self blame also is a shame message.
Yep.
And, I really was very stuck in shame for a very, very long time when it came to this journey. It was probably at least a year, if not longer. Honestly, I almost wonder if I'd have to really think about it, but I believe that I may not have really been able to recognize shame for what it was the until my mood started to stabilize. I
Mm-hmm.
started working with a nutritional therapy practitioner when I was about a year postpartum. And I started to stabilize some things in my body. And then I weaned and I stopped breastfeeding. And so my hormones started shifting.
Right.
And I actually didn't have issues with mood because of weaning. I found for me that after I weaned, I actually felt better about a month
Mm-hmm.
later, which I know every woman is different. But I almost think that a lot of the realization of where the shame was coming from and what the answer was, I think that revelation came to me actually in the season on the other side of the struggle, and
Yes.
kind of like when you process with the Lord, like, what
What
just
was that?
happened there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And like,
Mhm.
oh, why? Like, it was like, then I could actually take a step back and
Mhm.
recognize these narratives. And at what it came down to for me, I believe I started to kind of process some of this with the Lord probably about 9 months postpartum. Because I had a real turning point with the Lord where I remember being so angry at him for not healing me instantly, and for I felt like he was letting me struggle and just kind of like a bystander, like just watching me
Mhm.
struggle and not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And I was so angry with him and so like on the verge of offense. And
Mhm.
I had a moment where I think I was screaming at him in my clothes closet while
Relatable.
my baby was in the other room crying, and we're both crying.
Yeah.
And I had a moment where it was like I could just choose to just walk away from it all, or I could choose to move toward you, even though I don't understand any of this.
Yeah.
And so I chose to move towards God in that moment
Yeah.
and embrace some mystery. And that was really that surrender of my right to be in control, my right
Mm.
to understand. That moment of surrender actually allowed me to then begin to step into healing
Yep.
and connection with the Lord. And so I think at that point, I started to have some realization of it. You touched on it, but performance. I
Yep.
think that my postpartum journey really brought to the surface um, a sense of value and belonging and self-worth that I had in my ability to perform and to do things a certain way
Yep.
and to have it all together and to do a good job. And it really took going through a season where I was not capable of doing any of that and where I became completely reliant on the Lord.
Mhm.
I became reliant on him for my next breath.
Yep.
It was just one day at a time, and I remember just telling him like, my life is in your hands. Like, I cannot do this apart from your
Right.
strength. And I think when we get to that place of surrender and that place of reliance, and it strips away these things that are underneath shame,
Totally.
that are kind of like parts of our identity, right? So
Yes.
things like performance and perfection and um so and I think also it really highlighted to me, I started to have to wrestle with the fact that I could be loved and valued and worthy of love for no other reason than just because he says that I'm his.
Right.
It really came
Mhm.
down to understanding my identity as his daughter,
Right.
because when we're not living like a daughter, then we partner with some orphan mindsets of it's all it's all up
Up
to
to
me.
me. Yep.
It all depends on me. I'm self-reliant. If it falls apart, I'm to blame because it
Mhm.
all relies on me.
Mm.
Or
Yep.
if I can't do this, then I'm, worthless, or I'm bad, I'm a
Right.
bad mom. Those kinds of messages were all
Yes.
dependent on my ability or my strength. And so I think that is where that discovering my identity and accepting his love um apart from I had to be in a place where I literally could not perform or earn or achieve
Right.
perfection to
Right.
get to that place where it was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is not about me. This is about your love for me.
Yeah. If you're listening and you are struggling in this area, you're approaching postpartum, you're about to give birth, and you know that you want a different way of doing things, and I would highly encourage you to connect with Stefanie. She's going to share where you can find her. If you are, if you are years out from postpartum and you know that maybe there's some inner healing or emotional breakthrough that you need to process that part of your journey, I'll drop some resources for that as well. But Stefanie, would you mind sharing maybe, as I know we're close to time here, but would you mind sharing maybe just one piece of encouragement or advice and then where people can find you?
Yeah, I would say my biggest piece of encouragement would just be that wherever you're at, that you're having a postpartum that you enjoy, where you can experience peace and joy and confidence and um, be free from guilt and shame. I just want to encourage women that that is possible. This is not necessarily going to happen on its own. Like we said, our culture doesn't set us up for that, but it is possible. And there is a better way. And so
Yes.
I would love to connect with you. Basically, what I love to do is save women the time and the effort and the struggle that I went through. It's like, let me help you condense time,
Right.
take the pressure off of you, take the burden off of your shoulders, and give you a really clear way to get those breakthroughs because it's there, it's available. And the best ways to connect with me are my first name is actually spelled with an F instead of a PH. So Stephanie with an F, Overstreet on Instagram. And then StefanieOverstreet.com is my website. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was, a wealth of information. And I think just taking, everything we've shared in previous episodes and taking that, so much deeper. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today, Stefanie.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course.